You've heard about violent men in prison, but what about the women who left behind a trail of blood and fear? These are the women whose crimes shook their victims, their families, and the world watching from outside. Number 8. Krista Pike.
Can I please have my mom before I go?
Mr. Bates, please hold Miss Pike in the dock.
Krista Pike was convicted of the brutal murder of her 19-year-old classmate, Colleen Slemmer, in 1995. At just 18, she became the youngest woman in the United States to be sentenced to death during the post-Furman period. Her childhood was marked by instability and violence. Raised in a chaotic household, she endured neglect and witnessed frequent abuse. At 12, after the death of her grandmother, Pike attempted suicide. Her mental health worsened in the years that followed, leading to repeated stays in psychiatric care. In late 1994, she enrolled at the Job Corps Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. There, she met 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer. Pike grew obsessed with her, convinced Slemmer was trying to take her boyfriend, to Darrell Shipp. Jealousy soon consumed her, and Pike began plotting a violent response. With Shipp and their friend Shadola Peterson, she lured Slemmer to a remote spot near the University of Tennessee campus, pretending she wanted to make peace. What happened next was an act of shocking brutality. The group attacked Slemmer, taunting and beating her for more than half an hour. Pike and Shipp carved a pentagram into her chest before Pike crushed her skull with a piece of asphalt. Her cruelty didn't end there. Afterward, Pike bragged about the murder, even showing off a fragment of Slemmer's skull to others at the Job Corps. Within hours, police arrested the group. Investigators found the skull fragment in Pike's jacket, and she quickly confessed. She later claimed the killing was an accident that spiraled out of control, but her words couldn't account for the calculated violence of the attack. At trial, Pike was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The jury sentenced her to death by electrocution. Shipp was also convicted, but received life with the possibility of parole. Peterson turned state's witness and received probation as an accessory after the fact. Pike's own confession and the physical evidence sealed her fate. Even after her conviction, Pike continued to fight her sentence through appeals. In 2001, she briefly abandoned them, requesting execution, before reversing course. Her attorneys argued that her age and mental health should exempt her from the death penalty, but every appeal was rejected. Her violent behavior didn't stop behind bars. In 2001, she tried to strangle fellow inmate Patricia Jones with a shoestring. For that, she was convicted of attempted first-degree murder and given another 25 years. Then, in 2012, authorities uncovered a plot involving a corrections officer and an accomplice from New Jersey, aimed at breaking Pike out of prison. The plan was stopped before it began, but it reinforced her reputation as dangerous and unrelenting. Today, in 2025, Pike remains on death row, the only woman awaiting execution in Tennessee. Her case continues to attract attention for both the savagery of the crime and the long legal fight over her fate. If her execution moves forward, she will be the first woman put to death in Tennessee in more than 200 years. Number 7. Antoinette Frank.
Frank is trying to avoid the death sentence handed down after her conviction in a 1995 triple murder.
This is Antoinette Frank, a former officer of the New Orleans Police Department, whose actions stunned the city in 1995 and left an unforgettable mark on Louisiana's criminal history. At just 23 years old, Frank joined the NOPD in 1993, after what many described as a deeply controversial application process. She had failed multiple psychiatric evaluations, with experts warning against her entry into law enforcement. Yet, at the time, the department faced serious staffing shortages, and she was brought on despite red flags. Her early career painted a misleading picture of promise. She graduated near the top of her academy class, giving the impression that she was ready to take on the demands of the job. But once on duty, troubling signs began to appear. Supervisors often noted her indecisiveness, and her performance required frequent reviews. Colleagues grew uneasy with her unpredictable behavior, though she still managed to receive awards for community service. The cracks widened when she became involved with Rogers Lacaze, a known drug dealer. By the end of 1994, Frank's relationship with Lacaze had grown into both a personal and professional partnership. Officers noticed Lacaze driving her patrol car and even joining her on police calls. Everything came to a horrifying climax on the 4th of March 1995. That night, Frank and Lacaze targeted the Kim An restaurant, owned by a Vietnamese-American family in New Orleans. Frank was familiar with the place, having worked part-time there as a security guard. On the surface, her appearance seemed routine, just another visit from an officer she already knew. But once inside, the atmosphere shifted. She forced the employees, including her fellow officer Ronald Williams, into the kitchen at gunpoint. Lacaze quickly escalated the situation. In cold blood, he shot and killed Officer Williams, and then the pair turned their attention to the family. Two of the Vu siblings, Ha and Kwong, were executed in the kitchen in a brutal and calculated attack. The horror didn't end there. After the murders, Frank fled the scene, only to return moments later in a police car, pretending to be a responding officer. She attempted to manipulate the situation by flashing her badge, hoping to eliminate any surviving witnesses. But her plan failed. Chow Vu, the surviving sister, immediately recognized her and later identified her to investigators. That recognition sealed Frank's fate. The trial that followed was swift and damning. Frank was arrested, charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, and found guilty in just 22 minutes of jury deliberation. She was sentenced to death, making her one of the most notorious criminals in Louisiana's history, and the only woman currently on Louisiana's death row. Her co-conspirator, Rogers Lacaze, was also sentenced to death, but his conviction was later overturned. During the investigation, suspicion arose about her father's disappearance. He had been reported missing by Frank in 1993. After her conviction, his remains were discovered buried under her house, leading investigators to believe he was another of her victims. Number 6. Joanna Dennehy.
Amazing.
Looks good.
Thanks, Matt. That must be so good. Real sex.
Joanna Dennehy is known as one of the UK's most notorious female serial killers, responsible for the shocking Peterborough ditch murders of 2013. Born in 1982 inches, St Albans, England, Dennehy was raised in a seemingly stable family. She was close to her parents and had a normal childhood. However, her life took a dark turn in her teenage years as she began abusing substances and skipping school. At 16, she moved out of her family home, beginning a relationship with John Traynor. Over the next few years, Dennehy's behavior spiraled out of control. She had children, but struggled with motherhood, and openly admitted to not wanting them. As her relationship with Traynor deteriorated, she became increasingly violent, eventually driving him to leave with their children. In 2012, Dennehy moved to Peterborough, where she started living in a bedsit owned by Kevin Lee, a property developer. Lee and Dennehy began a relationship, with Dennehy also involving herself in roughing up tenants at Lee's properties. She was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder in 2012, which might explain some of her increasingly erratic behavior, but her descent into madness was about to reach its apex. Dennehy's killing spree began in March 2013. Over the span of 2 weeks, she murdered 3 men, Kevin Lee, Łukasz Slaboszewski, and John Chapman, before turning to attack 2 random dog walkers, John Rogers and Robin Bereza, who were both stabbed but survived. Dennehy's murders were not motivated by personal vendettas, but by a need for excitement. Dennehy's first victim, Lee, was found in a ditch, dressed in a black sequin dress, an act of humiliation after his murder. Slaboszewski's and Chapman's bodies were found shortly after. Dennehy's reign of terror came to an end when she was arrested on the 2nd of April 2013, just before the bodies of Slaboszewski and Chapman were discovered. During her trial in 2013, Dennehy shocked everyone by pleading guilty to all 3 murders and the 2 attempted murders. She showed no remorse, even laughing during the proceedings. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a whole life order, meaning she would never be eligible for parole. Currently, Joanna Dennehy is serving her sentence at HM Low Newton Prison in County Durham, having been transferred there in 2019. Her time behind bars has been marked by attempted relationships with other prisoners, including a brief suicide pact with her cellmate, Hayley Palmer, in 2018. Number 5. Susan Atkins.
I felt nothing. I felt absolutely nothing for her. As she begged for her life and for the life of her baby.
Susan Denise Atkins, known by several aliases including Sadie Mae Glutz, was one of the most infamous members of Charles Manson's cult, known as the Manson family. Born on the 7th of May, 1948, in San Gabriel, California, She played a direct role in the gruesome murders that shocked the world in 1969, including the notorious Tate LaBianca killings. Atkins' crimes weren't a single violent outburst, but a chilling series of murders carried out under Manson's influence. She was convicted of participating in 8 killings in total. The most infamous of these was the murder of actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, along with 4 others at her Los Angeles home. The very next night, Atkins joined other members of the family at the LaBianca residence, where they brutally murdered Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. These attacks were part of Manson's delusional plot to trigger a race war he called Helter Skelter. Atkins quickly became known not just for her role in the crimes, but for her disturbing lack of remorse. During her trial, she openly told the judge best lock their doors and watch their own kids. Like other devoted members of the family, she carved an X into her forehead, a permanent symbol of loyalty to Manson and his twisted ideology. Her violence, however, wasn't limited to the Tate LaBianca murders. Earlier in 1969, she took part in the killing of Gary Hinman, a musician and family acquaintance who was tortured for days before being murdered. Atkins later bragged about the Tate killings, going so far as to claim she had tasted Sharon Tate's blood and written the word pig on the wall with it. Statements like these, paired with her disturbing courtroom behavior, solidified her image as one of the most terrifying figures in the Manson family. Not long after the Hinman murder, Atkins was arrested. At first, she cooperated with investigators and testified before a grand jury, but she later withdrew her testimony. She was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, receiving the death penalty. But in 1972, when California abolished capital punishment, her sentence was reduced to life in prison. Atkins spent 38 years behind bars, during which she claimed to undergo a profound transformation. On the 24th of September, 2009, Susan Atkins died of brain cancer at the Central California Women's Facility, closing the chapter on one of the darkest figures of the Manson family. Number 4. Tamara Samsonova. Up next is Tamara Samsonova, better known as the Granny Ripper or Baba Yaga. She was a Russian woman who gained notoriety for a string of brutal murders that stretched over more than a decade. Born on the 25th of April, 1947, in Uzur, Krasnoyarsk Krai, she only became widely known after her arrest in 2015. Investigators believe her killings began in the early 2000s, and while she was officially linked to at least 2 confirmed murders, suspicions point to as many as 14 victims. Her first known killing was that of her tenant, Sergei Potanin, in September 2003. A quarrel between the two ended with Samsonova murdering him, dismembering his body, and scattering the remains throughout St. Petersburg. This pattern of violence would continue for years as she rented out rooms in her apartment, forming close relationships with tenants that would later turn deadly. In 2015, she grew close to 79-year-old Valentina Ulanova, who let her stay temporarily while Samsonova's own residence was being renovated. But when Ulanova eventually asked her to leave, the friendship took a sinister turn. Samsonova poisoned Ulanova's food with an overdose of sleeping pills, causing her to collapse. She then dismembered the body with a hacksaw and scattered the pieces across the neighborhood. On the 26th of July, 2015, Ulanova's remains, wrapped in a bathroom curtain, were discovered near a pond in St. Petersburg. CCTV footage later showed Samsonova carrying black plastic bags filled with body parts, leading to her arrest the very next day. What police uncovered afterwards was even more disturbing. In her apartment, investigators found a diary written in Russian, German, and English, filled with graphic details of her murders. In one entry, she described killing her tenant, Volodya, cutting him into pieces in the bathroom and stuffing the remains into plastic bags. During questioning, Samsonova admitted to murdering Ulanova, but refused to speak about most of the other killings. Authorities strongly suspect she was involved in the disappearance of her husband, Alexei Samsonov, who vanished in 2000 and was never found. Her diary also hinted at further victims, and one headless, limbless body discovered years earlier in her neighborhood was later tied to her when a business card linked back to her flat. Even while in custody, Samsonova remained calm, often unsettlingly so at one point. She blew a kiss to journalists during her court appearances. Despite her partial confessions, the exact number of her victims remains unknown. There were also disturbing hints of cannibalism. Investigators feared she may have eaten parts of her victims, particularly internal organs such as lungs. Some believed her fascination with black magic and occult literature may have fueled these tendencies. Samsonova's trial and investigation dragged on as police worked to uncover the full scale of her crimes. To this day, the true extent of her killing spree is still shrouded in mystery. Number 3. Janine Jones.
Families of these young children have been waiting for this moment for close to 35 years.
Jones was sent to prison in 1985 for the murder of Chelsea McClellan.
Janine Ann Jones, born on the 13th of July, 1950, is a former licensed vocational nurse and a convicted serial killer, responsible for the deaths of up to 60 children under her care during the 1970s and 1980s in Texas. Known as the Angel of Death, Jones's method of control over her patients was coldly calculated. She injected them with drugs like digoxin, which can cause heart arrhythmias, or succinylcholine, a powerful muscle relaxant that paralyzes the muscles responsible for breathing. After inducing these crises, she would then appear as the hero, stabilizing the child and gaining praise from her colleagues and the child's family. This cycle of causing medical emergencies and saving the children gave her the attention and admiration she sought. However, her pattern of behavior was not immediately noticed, as medical staff assumed the deaths were unrelated to her actions. In 1982, a formal investigation was launched after the case of Rolando Santos, a baby who nearly died after an overdose of heparin while under Jones's care. This investigation, coupled with rising suspicions about the death rate during her shifts, brought the focus back to Jones. In 1984, she was convicted of the murder of 5-month-old Chelsea McClellan, who died after Jones injected her with succinylcholine during a routine checkup. Despite her earlier suspicious activities, it was Chelsea's death that triggered her arrest and eventual conviction. Investigators found evidence linking Jones to numerous other child deaths, though these could not be definitively proven. In addition to the murder conviction, Jones was later charged with harming other children, including cases where she injected them with succinylcholine or heparin, further solidifying her role as a serial killer. Jones was sentenced to 99 years in prison for the murder of Chelsea McClellan, with a concurrent 60-year sentence for nearly killing Rolando Santos with heparin. However, as of 2016, Jones's conviction faced new challenges due to a Texas law that mandated early release for inmates convicted of violent crimes before 1987, provided they maintained good behavior. To prevent her early release, prosecutors filed new charges in 2017, accusing her of murdering 1-month-old Joshua Sawyer. This move stalled her release, and in 2020, Jones pleaded guilty to Sawyer's murder as part of a plea bargain, receiving a life sentence. Despite her conviction and ongoing legal battles, Jones's case has raised questions about the number of victims she may have had. Hospital records from her time at Bexar County Medical Center were allegedly destroyed to avoid further litigation, obscuring the true extent of her crimes. At her peak, Jones was suspected in up to 60 deaths, though the exact number may never be known. She remains incarcerated at the Lane Murray Unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, with parole not possible until she is approximately 87 years old, around 2037. Number 2. Celeste Carrington. Up next, we have Celeste Simone Carrington, a 30-year-old woman from East Palo Alto, who is one of the most notorious criminals to walk the streets of California in the early 1990s. On the 17th of January 1992, Carrington's criminal path took shape when she burglarized a Dodge dealership in Redwood City, stealing a .357 Magnum revolver. This weapon would later be used in her subsequent crimes. Just days later, on the 26th of January 1992, Carrington burglarized an office building where she had previously worked. During the robbery, she encountered Victor Esparza, a janitor at the site. After robbing him of cash and his ATM card, Carrington shot him in the head at point-blank range. Esparza was likely on his knees when the fatal shot was fired. Carrington's violent spree continued on the 11th of March 1992, when she struck again, this time in Palo Alto. She burglarized an office building where she had also worked as a janitor. There, she encountered 6-year-old Carolyn Gleason. In a struggle, Carrington shot Gleason in the head, killing her instantly. Like Esparza, Gleason had been kneeling, likely trying to shield herself when Carrington fired. After the murder, Carrington stole Gleason's car, keys, and ATM card, later withdrawing $300 from an ATM. Just 5 days later, Carrington attempted to murder Dr. Alan Marks, a pediatrician in Redwood City. After burglarizing his medical office, she shot Marks 3 times during a struggle, injuring his shoulder, thumb, and forearm. However, Marks survived and would later testify against her, a key factor in Carrington's eventual conviction. Carrington's arrest on the 20th of March 1992 came after police linked her to the crimes through the stolen revolver, which had been used in all the shootings. Victims' personal belongings, such as Gleason's purse, keys, and pager, were found in Carrington's apartment, and ATM records showed her withdrawal from Gleason's account. During police interrogation, Carrington confessed to all 3 crimes in detail, although she claimed that her boyfriend had coerced her into the robberies. In the courtroom, Carrington faced multiple charges, including first-degree murder for the deaths of Esparza and Gleason, attempted murder for Marks, and robbery. Carrington was convicted on all counts and sentenced to death. Despite attempts to overturn her conviction, including claims of ineffective legal counsel, the California Supreme Court upheld the death sentence. Carrington remains on death row, one of only 15 women among the 683 condemned prisoners in the state. Number 1. Emilia Carr.
I was arrested at 7.5 months pregnant. Towards the end of the pregnancy, I was housed in the infirmary.
Last but not least, we have Emilia Lily Carr, a woman whose actions earned her a place as one of the most feared individuals in Florida's criminal history. In February 2009, Carr, alongside her then-partner Joshua Fulgham, committed the brutal murder of 26-year-old Heather Strong. Strong was Fulgham's estranged wife, caught in the middle of a violent and toxic love triangle. At the time, Carr was pregnant with Fulgham's child, but that didn't stop her from becoming deeply involved in the murder. Far from being an innocent bystander, Carr played an active role in the crime. Carr had a history marked by troubled relationships and violence. She had been married twice, with 3 children, one of them fathered by an ex-boyfriend. Her past included a conviction for her involvement in a grand theft, adding to her already complex and dark character. However, it was her role in Heather Strong's death that would cement her notoriety. Carr had initially been engaged to Fulgham in late 2008, but just a month later, Fulgham married Strong. Despite no longer being romantically involved with Fulgham, Carr's obsessive and manipulative tendencies didn't fade. The relationship between her and Strong was far from friendly, with Carr's jealousy and resentment growing. She continued to babysit Strong's children, all the while seething over Strong's relationship with Fulgham. The tension escalated further when Fulgham was arrested in January 2009 for threatening Strong with a shotgun. As the conflict deepened, so did Carr's involvement. By February 2009, the situation had reached its breaking point. Carr and Fulgham lured Strong to a trailer behind Carr's mother's house. Despite Carr's initial attempt to break Strong's neck, it was ultimately the combination of duct tape and a plastic bag that led to Strong's death. She was suffocated while bound to a chair. Her body was found a month later, buried in a shallow grave. The cause of death ruled as asphyxiation. Carr, who had been in frequent communication with law enforcement, had made 10 statements, each given without an attorney present, that outlined her involvement in the crime. In one of these, she unknowingly confessed to her role in the murder. She described how she and Fulgham restrained Strong, with Fulgham holding her down while Carr taped her hands and feet. When Strong fought back, they resorted to strangulation. Attempts to break her neck failed, and the suffocation ultimately killed her. Carr's confessions, coupled with the forensic evidence, made her guilt undeniable. Despite her attempts to distance herself from the crime, the specifics of her statements were too detailed to be dismissed as fabrications. The evidence was overwhelming. On the 24th of March 2009, Carr was arrested, and her trial soon followed. In December 2010, after just 2.5 hours of deliberation, a jury convicted Carr of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The heinous nature of the crime led to her sentencing to death in February 2011. If you want more stories about the world's most dangerous minds, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. And tell us in the comments, do you think she's hiding more secrets than she confessed?